Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody, and welcome back.
We're here again with another episode of the Retail Lounge.
Today's topic is sustainability. It's a huge topic, and we thought only of one person to bring on that would be great to talk about this is Bill Emrich. He is the Vice President of Innovation and Strategy at Retail.Boundaries. What's up, Bill?
Hey, guys.
So, Bill, if you'd like to just give us some background about yourself, where you came from, where you're going with us, what you're tasked to do. I know that you have a wealth of information when it comes to sustainability in the retail world.
Yeah, I have been a retail consultant in this industry for longer than I would like to admit to at this point. I've done a lot of different jobs, but pretty consistently I've had an innovation role over the years. Innovation is really a function of studying consumer demand first and foremost, and then there's sort of this middle step of envisioning how consumer demand translates to our business, and it just sort of involves trying to imagine what products and services we might need to offer in order to be attractive to the brand clients that we're after. And then the third is really just creating a marketing engine to speak to all of these brands about the services that we invent together. So that's always been a big part of what I do, and it's my central function here at RWOB.
Awesome. So it would be great to kind of get into it about all eyes are on sustainability. For a long time, it's become just a magic word and a fluff word sometimes, but there's a lot of content behind it. There's a lot of necessities behind it that I don't think everyone's thinking about. And, in the retail world, we use a lot of energy. We use a lot of materials a lot of the time, putting in graphics, new kiosks, and designing for stores in general. And, if, not a lot of people, they know a lot about sustainable options. And brands say they're doing it, but we're not sure if they are or not. So if you can kind of walk into that a little bit and talk about the overall challenge of when it comes to sustainability in the retail world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super complicated. And even for me and for the group that I work with, we study it pretty extensively. But there are a handful of challenges. One is that retailers are kind of in a difficult spot because we are the retail industry, brands, consumers. We're all still fairly early in the sort of curve of our own learning, and so a lot of where the challenge with sustainability rests today is with consumers and it's with brands. So retailers do play a part in sort of the greenhouse gas emissions challenge that we're all trying to face, but it is comparatively a much smaller piece than, say, consumers contribute or brands contribute. And I guess what I mean by that is, first of all, you have demand starting with consumers. There's a lot of research that suggests that consumers are really quite stressed and anxious about, just a climate change situation and environment that just appears to be constantly getting worse. And every few weeks there's a new climate crisis, a new freak weather event that happens, and it just sort of brings to front a lot of concerns that consumers have. And so brands are responding to what consumers want. And so brands sit around and they're trying to figure out what products do we bring to market. And so they're doing all this work trying to bring products to market and trying to change themselves. Meanwhile, there's a cost of living crisis. And so you have what for me is one of the huge sort of paradoxes in the whole thing, where you have consumers making a huge pitch for brands to bring more products to market, more sustainable products to market, and to themselves operate in a more sustainable way. Yet many consumers can't, in the end, afford to buy products that are a little bit more expensive because they are produced in a different way. And so brands are like stuck in this space, like, we're trying to do this, but it's really hard to have a solid business case around it.
Yeah, it's tough to kind of stay face to the public and tell them you're doing it, but then at the same time, how do you make it cost effective and affordable for people to use
Right.
it and like talk to talk, walk to walk with you?
Absolutely. Tricky situation.
So, Bill, I guess given those circumstances, when it comes to strategies of effectiveness for retailers when they're focusing on their carbon footprint and sustainable, controlling the waste that's produced through what they're making, how would you start to go about that in terms of like describing what those strategies look like? Like how would you define that effectiveness?
Yeah, super good question. And it's something that we talk a lot about. There are a number of ways that I think brands go about trying to reduce carbon footprint, and a lot of it relates to material choice and the location of where things are produced, and then how things are logistically shipped around the world to get to market and stuff like that. And those things really do impact emissions. There's no question about it. But typically, um, they don't impact them as much as some other topics. And so one of the things that we wrestle with is, if we're in a conversation with a client, a lot of clients, I should say, a lot of brand clients have made um, relatively big commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it all sort of stems from this Paris Climate Accord in 2015. And that agreement was for countries and the brands operating within those countries to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Many brands have made promises to make reductions prior to 2050. There are a number of brands that have 2030 dates and 2040 dates and all kinds of dates in between. Anyway, so there is a lot of pressure that brands feel to make these changes. And so with that pressure, we spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what are the ways that brands can make the biggest impact? Mm-hmm. And so, product circularity is one of the things that we go to quite a bit. And really what we mean by that is the idea of producing, well, if we just take what we do, we design fixtures for fixture programs and environments for brands at retail. So if we think about what we do, product circularity would be, instead of designing a fixture or a program that has one life cycle, it starts in probably 3 to 6 months and it's supposed to last for 2 years, and then a different marketing campaign will replace it. We ask the question, well, what happens if at a brand, maybe two stakeholders, two people who have P&Ls with a sub brand get together and they together develop a program that one will use for 2 years, and then they'll pass ownership to a second. And maybe there's refurbishment that happens in between. Maybe they're just redecorated. You can just ship out graphics that go on it or something like that. But what we really like about a scenario like that, a circular scenario like that, is that you're taking a program that has, let's just say, 100 metric tons of emissions, and you're really able to divide it by 2 because it's going to live 2 life cycles. And so when we think about ways that we can really move the needle, taking emissions and cutting them in half is super appealing to us. So one example.
Things we were going to talk about today is Virgin Atlantic and what they're doing when it comes to just as simple as fueling. I mean, obviously transportation is massive when it comes to kind of cutting that carbon footprint, and the cost could be paid back to maybe doing more sustainable products.
Yeah, the Virgin Atlantic thing is a great example. It's one of our favorites. It's back in November of last year, so fairly recently, Virgin Atlantic piloted the first transatlantic flight using all sustainable green materials. And if you just look at it like that, it's a phenomenal accomplishment. The reality is that there's a portion, sort of like with automotive fuel, there's a portion of sustainable fuel that's used in the aviation air travel industry anyway. But a flight that is executed with only sustainable fuels is kind of a big deal. It's there's a bit of a paradox with it. Um, there's a criticism of that flight, and there are a couple of other airlines that are making progress like that. And the big criticism is, well, there isn't a supply chain that can supply enough sustainable fuel to really offset what's the use of fossil fuels. And it's totally true, but it seems to us like it's a super important first step, and that there's probably a number of innovations that are necessary to reduce carbon emissions in air travel, and it's one good step forward for them. So we do like that one.
Yeah, I would even say too, I mean, even in our own business, I think we've gotten more creative on transshipping, various projects in one. It's not just from one client that's dedicated to one truck unless it's an emergency, but we'll find out who's going to that general region and take as much stuff as we can, to get it there. So it's easier on cost, and it's one truck going versus 4 or 5 or 6 truckloads.
Yeah, it's another great innovation. I mean, it's perhaps a smaller one relative to like the Virgin Atlantic, but we are one of a number of players in our sector, and small things that we can do all aggregate together and add up to make meaningful change. So it's important still.
Yeah, definitely. You make a good point there in terms of meaningful change and like having that power of responsibility in terms of what we're producing, where it's going, and paying attention to those small nuances in our work. That really is the power of innovation, especially in terms of the retail world, and like what makes the most effective outcome at the end of the day, right? So
a lot of this stuff happens in the background that people aren't noticing to be sustainable, or to save costs and to put sustainability somewhere else, so people can afford it. When it comes to engaging retailers with sustainability, do you have a way of quickly educating them, or, a way of asking questions that gets them thinking about maybe what they're not doing, or a direction that you go in, or there's a question you might ask them that say, hey, we're not doing this. You know what I mean? Anything that gets them to educate their own consumers on sustainability, because then that's like a marketing pitch, afterwards. So it's getting the actual retailer then to kind of walk the walk and get their customers, and their consumers educated on why they should go in the sustainability route. Do you have like a specific way that you talk to them about that?
Yeah, and I think that's it's a huge challenge for retailers. Again, I think our view is that they don't have a lot of work to do to try to motivate their customers. The customers are coming to the stores already conscious of environmental challenges, and interested in sustainability and stuff like that. It really, I think, for consumers, with the possible exception of luxury consumers, has to do with what they feel like they can really afford. And it's just a tough moment right now. There's really no way around it. I mean, there's all the inflation that we've all seen over the last couple of years, and we appear to just be transitioning out of some of that. But a lot of folks are feeling a lot of economic pressure, and so while they may want something, they can't necessarily afford it, and it puts retailers in a tough spot. And I guess the other thing that I'd say is that retailers are in the business of supplying what there is demand for. Retailers and brands sit around trying to figure out what it is that consumers want.
Yeah.
And trying to fill their stores with it, trying to produce the products that go to the stores and then fill their stores with it. And this difficult spot that many consumers are in makes that task very hard, I think, for a lot of retailers, and obviously a lot.
Keep diving into that a little bit more in terms of like tactics you would suggest to retailers in terms of, maintaining their carbon footprint, obviously, but just waste in general, right? Like what else is there outside of just travel, emissions, fuel, and relocation of products, and in the production side that, retailers should pay attention to?
Yeah, so we talked a few minutes ago about product circularity, which is really just the idea of, how do we take a a fixture program or an environment, a retail store full of fixtures, and instead of having it live for what I'll call a traditional period of time or a single life cycle, how do we extend that? How do you take a system and design it so that it can be used multiple times without compromising the experience that consumers need in order to be motivated when they're in the stores? So a circular strategy of figuring out ways to have multiple life cycles is a great solution. Another one is modular design, and it is similar. It's still circular, but it's a concept of designing a perhaps more complex fixture solution where you have fixtures that are made of modules, and if you can sort of, just for the sake of conversation here, you have a top piece, a header of some kind, and then you have a main central piece that is flexible, but it's primarily where the product is held and merchandised, and then you have a bottom base section. You would have 3 modules there. And so a modular, circular modular approach might be one where, a design team looks at, 3 different modular fixtures and then looks at how you might combine different modules from the 3 fixtures to form other types of fixtures so that over time you're able to move things around and change the way things look. But as elements maybe are damaged and need to be replaced, a much smaller piece can be sent in to replace the thing that's broken, or maybe there's different retail footprint or different models. I'm blanking on the word. Formats, different retail formats, small footprint formats, where you could take maybe 2 elements and put them together, and that would work really well for a smaller format. So just we're super interested in the idea of how modules can be combined and re-envisioned to solve for different things and sort of broadly expand life cycle.
Yeah.
The third one, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What I would say on that note, really quickly is, you kind of touched on with design, and we're going to have another episode talking about more of the design side, but with that end goal of sustainability, designers have to think about where that's going to live at the end. So they're not just initially starting with a sketch. They've got to have a couple of goals that they've got to hit, and that's modularity. It's thinking about the longevity of it and how that can be repurposed number of times. So that totally makes sense.
Yeah, super sorry you dropped out for half of it. I think you're just talking about the length of life cycle and
design, like how design goes after it. They have to think about the end goal versus they have to think about how far this is going to live, and the modularity, like you've discussed already. So there's more things to think about nowadays than past life.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a different way of thinking for sure.
Yep.
And if I can, it sort of segues into the third thing that we like to talk about, which is kind of a mind bender for all of us, is the idea of contemplating. Well, let me back up. So we're familiar with scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions.
Yeah. Yep.
Scope, there are many different scopes that compose total, emissions generated in the world by manufacturers. There's lots of scopes. I'm not totally sure how many they are, but there's more than 3. Scope 1 and 2 really relate to the way that a brand operates within its own 4 walls. And that's primarily scope 1. Scope 2 is sort of the energy that the brands need to purchase in order for the operations within their 4 walls to function. Scope 3 is everything else. Scope 3 is the emissions generated by all of the suppliers, by their supply chain. And for the vast majority of brands in the world, Scope 3 is by far the biggest percent of their total greenhouse gas emissions. And it is what makes it so hard to make meaningful progress towards a net zero, towards carbon neutrality, is that you're trying to reduce emissions at companies that you do not own, you just do work with.
Yeah.
So it's just very hard to do it. And plus, overseas and different people measure things in different ways. And so coming up with a single rating system so that you could be sure that the supplier in Europe is operating the way that they're supposed to, and the supplier in Asia and the supplier in South America, and it's just super complex. So scope 3 is really a difficult thing. But I walk you through that because a big part of scope 3 is not the supply chain. It is the impact that end users, that consumers have, by the way that the products that they purchase are disposed of. So like if we think about cosmetics, because I happen to be reading something this morning about cosmetics. If you have a lipstick in a whatever, I'm not a cosmetics expert, but you have these beautiful containers that hold cosmetics, and when the product life cycle is over, most of the time consumers have, by and large, one choice, which is just to throw it away. The plastics are not plastics that are commonly recycled. There are no great options for what to do with something that's made of 5 materials when one of them is the only one that's typically recycled. So again, when we think about how to move the needle in a significant way, one of the things that we're becoming super interested in is sort of brainstorming the idea of what might we be able to do to help brands teach and encourage consumers to handle end of life cycle for their products in a different way. And so just one example, it's a much longer conversation, but just one example would be, for a partner like us to produce, say, a corrugate or a cardboard box that, it's not too big, but it can be located in lots of different retail settings, lots of different doors. And if we stick with our cosmetics idea, you could have one, say, in the cosmetics category at a grocery store, or at a mass market store, or at a cosmetics store, or at a consumer electronics store. I mean, it's a strategic line of thinking, but I guess the idea that we like is, how do you put something out there that can be a receptacle, so that when it's full, it can just simply be closed, almost like an Amazon package, and it's postage paid, and you just drop it in the mail, and it gets sent back to us or to the brand, and then the brand can take a very specialized set of actions to recycle that are really not possible in other types of retail environments or recycling environments. And so anyway, just looking at ways that we might be able to help brands encourage and teach new end-of-life behaviors to their consumers. It's just an idea that's super interesting.
Yeah, I would say like even the supplement world has kind of started doing that, with, their new bottles. They'll send you like a biodegradable packet, and then you just kind of refill the bottle. I've seen more and more types of trends of that coming out, that it's just, they're making the bottles look really trendy, and they can live in your home somewhere, and it's a nice, piece to show off. So you're not getting rid of it. So yeah, that's I can definitely see that needs to be pushed a little bit harder.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I keep thinking about the longer that you talk about this narrative of upcycling in the design world, and the extra step that we can take to encourage consumers, as well as our partners, as well as other retailers out there, to create these products that are like pushing in that direction, whether it's reusable bottles or biodegradable straws, or just whatever even the materials made out of, or instructions for consumers. So yeah, it's visually narrating that productive visual, and it's important. So
I will.
It's super fun to think about.
I will say that if they're going to redo anything biodegradable, I need to redo the straw a little bit better.
I agree.
Some of those straws, they do not help. I understand the reason why, but once you put that in a Pepsi or something like that, it's gone.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I really like, I don't know if it's 2 years ago now, but when Starbucks edited out straws altogether.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think, there's all kinds of things that brands do that try to walk they appear to try to walk a line between sort of maintaining the systems that they already have and the flow of certain types of products through their systems, and because it's expensive to create disruption and
Yep.
expensive to change processes and all that kind of stuff. But I loved the fact that Starbucks edited out straws, and what they did instead was come up with a sippable cold beverage lid. So straws, biodegradable straws, or no straws.
And I don't mind that at all. I actually like those caps. They're kind of nice.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
like one less thing that gets caught on your clothes and it falls over. Can't tell you how many times I've like knocked my drink over because the straw caught my coat or anything. It was pain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then even begs the question, right, in terms of like the minimalist world and maybe not overproducing or overcreating things that we don't need for whatever, we're packaging for, whatever the displays are. And again, Bill, going back to your comment about like modularity, that's where I started to think about this whole concept of design upcycling and really thinking about that conversation and how to continue to produce that, right, moving forward. So
honestly, Ellie, I think you put your finger on, like, at least from my perspective, that's the central issue. There's
High five.
Some of them move the needle a lot, some of them move the needle a little, but what you're talking about right now is probably at the center of how the emissions challenge is ultimately dealt with. And that has to do with consumption levels.
Right.
We consume a lot. I saw this thing the other day. It was a stat. I can't remember what it was, but I know I could Google it when I'm done here. But the stat was that if everybody in the world lived like Americans, we would need 5 worlds to support it.
Yep.
Right? So, I mean, yeah, that's a good little soundbite.
That's awesome.
But it's a great analogy to frame in our own minds the sort of magnitude of change that's going to be required to really move the needle the way that it needs to move for us to shift away from the trajectory that we're on right now.
Right. You are 100% correct.
Well, I think we've come up to our time. Bill, I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for all the insight. And I think there'll be a sustainability episode 2 at some point about, new findings as we go. Because, we say that the word's been around for a while, but no one, like you said, has really scratched the entire surface yet and really getting into it. So curious to hear more soon. But, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Bill. And hopefully we'll be talking again.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Sure.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.